So welcome. We're going to spend a little bit of time, probably an hour or so, just kind of going over um, some of the sites that we utilize for weather forecasting and just kind of going through each of them and discussing a little bit about, how we use them and kind of the process that we use for looking up weather forecast. I think every year we kind of get questions. It seems to be, there's a lot of different sites you can utilize, and a lot of information out there. And I think the thing with forecasting for me personally is that, as you'll hear in the presentation, but the trend is your friend. The meteorologists always say that too, where we can kind of look at the forecast, and if it's trending one direction, you can kind of expect it to be that way, or if it's flip-flopping all over the place, you can use that as a sign. Maybe the models aren't picking up exactly what's being forecasted and is not very clear, and we'll kind of go over some of those things as well. um, Everybody should be muted and should have access to the chat. If you got questions, feel free to um, ask them in the chat, or if you want me to go back and um, see something again, explain something, we'll do that as well. And I'll just throw out, I am not a meteorologist. This is purely from the perspective of somebody who um, would be organizing a burn or setting up a burn, looking for weather for a burn. So I'm not going to get into the meteorology of it and how things operate, but from my perspective, I'll give you a little bit of what the knowledge that I know. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen, turn my camera off. All right, should be able to everybody see my screen okay?
It's just your screensaver, Teeter.
Yep, that's what it should be. So
Yep.
perfect, thank you. All right, so one of the first things that I tend to look at for any burn season is our drought monitor. And this essentially is just kind of, I look at climatology, like where are we at in the season, right? So, just like this year, just like last year, we're kind of going into the season with drought. And so the US Drought Monitor is a good way to access that. And you can click on individual states and regions here. But this is going to kind of show you where we're sitting at in terms of drought. And I always tell people that, just because we're in drought, just because we're in extreme drought or exceptional drought, doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't be burning. But I think it does indicate that we need to plan differently and look at our prescriptions differently. When you're writing your prescriptions, if you put in there like, this is only up, this plan would only serve up to a D2 drought or D3 drought status. And if you get into like, threes or fours or something like that, maybe you're looking at, raising your minimum level of humidity, or adding extra personnel, adding more water, adding, better fire breaks, bigger fire breaks to handle some of those drought conditions that could really lower, your fuel moistures in your 10 and 100,000 hour fuel moistures that typically become more of a problem. Obviously, we know that 1 hour fuel moisture is 1 hour, but once you get into those higher fuel moistures, those 10, 100,000 hour fuel moistures, they tend to cause problems the day after the burn or 3 days after the burn, where you have some of these bigger logs or trees, something up in a tree catches and it's burning, and then that catches and causes problems in the days following. And we've seen that, especially in this last year. If you guys remember the 2025 spring season, one of the things that I noticed is that we'd have a really good, like we'd have 1 or 2 good burn days, and then we'd be followed by like 2 days of red flag warnings and really high winds, and that pattern kind of repeated. And I think that's a good opportunity to look at those, those longer fuel moistures. Another way of looking the drought monitor. Let's see if I can pull it up here. Yes, thank you, Ashley, for putting those in there. And we do have a sheet that has all these links on it as well. So on the wildland fire assessment page, this is actually a new link. Actually, I'll put it in the chat. But in the products, they do this modeled forecast, live and dead moisture fuels. And so you can see that, I'll have to zoom in a little bit. They kind of changed this here in the last year, but this is kind of a modeled moisture content. So here's 10-hour dead fuel moistures. And you can see kind of where we're sitting at relative to this year. You can see that obviously in the kind of the western southern Great Plains region, they got lower 10-hour dead fuel moistures. You probably saw some of that in some of the wildfires that happened over the weekend or yesterday or whatever it was. And in our prescribed fire refresher that we do every year, we also kind of look at previous years and kind of where we align. And so this can be used kind of as a predictive thing of where we're sitting at in terms of our fuel moistures. Let's see, put it in the chat. And typically they have, like in years past, this page has also given kind of the 100 and 1,000-hour moisture content fuel moistures, but they're not on there currently. They just have it with the 10-hour. And so they have the current, and then they also have the kind of forecasted for that. And then the other thing that we typically are going to look at in terms of kind of climatology before burns is kind of the long range outlook by the National Weather Service. You will see if you go to this is the National Weather Service page, and you can basically just click on your area and it will pull up your local forecast office in your region. But the place to find the long-term outlooks is the same place on every page. Every page is really standardized, and so it's really easy to look at or find the information. I shouldn't say that these weather pages are notorious for having tons of information on them, but they are typically all somewhat the same. And the place to look at it here is just these climate and past weather. Once you click on the climate and past weather, you'll go down to climate prediction and variability. And there's a bunch of information on here that will show you the information. One thing here is this drought assessment. This will show, this has the current U.S. drought monitor on it, but also has the outlook, and seasonal drought outlook. So if you click on these, it will tell you kind of like if the drought is going to persist, if it's going to be removed, or there's drought development likely. So this is just kind of based on long range models and forecast on whether drought's going to continue or persist. And then here's the seasonal drought outlook here. So, here they're saying more drought development is likely in western parts of the Great Plains, southwest Nebraska. They're adding kind of parts of there, down through eastern Colorado, Texas, northeast New Mexico, things of that. So it's always good information to have from that standpoint of kind of what they're seeing. And a lot of that is typically driven from these kind of monthly and seasonal outlooks. So they have basically three different categories that you can look up. So they have these week 2 forecasts. So they have a 6 to 10 day temperature and precip forecast. And then they have 8 to 14 day precipitation forecast. So if we want to see what maybe the next 6 to 10 days look like in temperature wise, based off kind of long range models. And I will preface this with that, these change, right? Something could pop up and they could obviously change. And so again, we're looking at kind of the longer term climatic and variables. But if you click on this, you can see that, we're forecasted to have kind of above normal temperatures, which is, obviously if you were out the other day when it was 80 degrees outside, you can see that pretty much tracks. But going through March 1st, they're showing kind of above average temperatures really across the whole United States. I know we're supposed to get, a few inches of snow possibly today, but, something like this, you could look at and say, maybe I shouldn't be burning brush piles if it's going to be really warm next week, potentially another red flag, especially if you got a lot of brush piles, or maybe you've got, really messy brush piles, hard to access piles, things of that nature. Same thing with precipitation. It looks like near normal. I don't know what that means. Normal precipitation this time of year is hit or miss, but you can kind of see this is kind of like that equal chances where, obviously get a little bit of snow or rain, moisture, but we're definitely not below that portion. And then the same thing with like the 8 to 14 day map as well. Again, this showing that it's going to probably warm back up most likely, which is good for getting some prescribed fires in. The other thing I would recommend people do is read these forecast discussions. A lot of this you may not understand, but there are little nuggets in there that you can find within these forecast discussions that talk about probabilities of things happen or forecast confidence, about models. It will help you understand kind of the climate weather models a little bit better. Once you start to read it, kind of understand, you can kind of look up some of these things in there, and you can just Google and be like, well, what does that mean? And you can helps you kind of better understand it. And then they go into these monthly outlooks too, where they have the monthly seasonal outlook discussions and maps. So these are the 30-day maps. So they have temperature and precipitation. And again, as with anything with climate models and stuff like that, the further we're away from the actual day of weather happening, 3 to 6 hours, the models, get cloudier and cloudier. So things obviously can change, patterns can change, things of that nature. But you can see for March, and also you can see up top, this was issued on February 19th. So this was issued today. And so they're predicting for the month of March that, we're going to be kind of a little bit above normal, in the leaning above category, 40, 50% leaning above. And then for precipitation, there's basically equal chances, but we are seeing that in southwest Nebraska that there is leaning below normal precipitation for the month of March. And then they spit out these things too. So like you can kind of take a peek into what, March, April, May, or April, May, June, May, June, July. are looking like currently. Again, I think things change obviously month to month, so I wouldn't be looking too far ahead. But if you're planning from like maybe you're like, oh, maybe we're not gonna burn this spring, but maybe try to burn this summer, and you can look at your June, July temperatures. You can see that there's gonna be above temperatures or potentially above temperatures out west, which is not great. They've had way below normal snowpack, and they're looking at very hot summer, so it could be a pretty big wildfire year. Um, if you were in the position to be planning for something, a scenario like that, you can utilize this as a planning tool or guide. So this is basically the same, the monthlies and the seasonal outlook. So that gives you kind of a really good kind of outlook on kind of what's happening from the climatic standpoint in terms of, what potential is looking like for the next, 8 to 30 days up to months out. So next thing want to go through, so, let's say you're looking for your burn day and you're kind of looking at, you know, within the next week or so. Again, here you can kind of go to weather.gov and you click on your respective area, and it will basically pull up your forecast office, and you can either type your location here and zoom in, or you could just click in and try to find your location. Um, Off to the right, this side here, you can click in and zoom in even further into these grids, get fairly close, and it should update for you. So I typically I don't use this landing page anymore. I'll get to kind of what we're utilizing more now, just from a simplicity standpoint, easier standpoint. But this is a really good, quick way. What I do is I have the burn location. I'll typically save it onto my phone as its own link, and so I can just pull it up quickly. So whatever the burn unit is, like, okay, I'm going to pull up that, and it'll show me that, keep that forecast in there. And essentially, you kind of look at the top here, like, obviously Fridays can be high of 28, probably not a really good burn day. Saturday 31, Sunday 30. So it's kind of not looking really great, unless you're doing brush piles. So you get some snow and you got maybe through Sunday, you got pretty decent weather to maybe get those burned. And then, of course, if you're looking at burning brush piles or you're looking further out, you want to go down to these detailed forecasts and maybe look a little bit further. So Monday's looking like a fairly decent day too, probably not a lot of melting for snow. But then you start looking at Tuesday and Wednesday down here in the detailed discussions where it's going to be highs of 60. And so, there's going to be quite a bit of melting happening on that during that time frame. And so this kind of gives you a general idea of kind of what's happening in the future. So again, let's say like this was a burn day, sunny with high of 28, northwest wind 6 to 11, gust high of 17. That doesn't really give you the full picture. And so we obviously like to go in and use hourly weather forecasting. And the way to do it on this one is up top right hand corner, there's hourly weather forecast. You can click there. You can also do it down here, hourly weather forecast here. And so it'll basically bring you to this page, and there's already some of this stuff is pre-checked, and I like to go in and actually click off some of the stuff that I don't need on there just to make the graph a little bit easier to read. So don't really care about dew point all that much, wind chill, precip potential. Sometimes I'll leave that on, but I have other ways that I'll show later about the precip, relative humidity. And then I get rid of my rain, snow, thunder, sleet, fog. Then under the fire weather category, they have things you can check on, like mixing height is always good. You can throw on your 20-foot 20-foot winds. You can throw in your grassland fire index. And then you just click submit. And then it will come up a little bit more cleanly for you so you can read this graph. And so you can see through this, it'll show you your temperature in this top box. It's going to show you what the winds are predicted to be along with any gusts. These lines, like, so this would be a northwest wind. It's basically like, think about a flag. If you planted a flag in the ground, so that, like, if you plant that flag in an angle, that's where the wind is coming from. So if it was a southeast wind, the flag would be planted basically upside down and to the left. And then your green graph here on the third row is your relative humidity. And then your sky cover is going to be the blue line. It's going to show you how much percentage of clouds out there. So like tomorrow afternoon, it's going to be fairly sunny out, but you'll see as the evening progresses, we're going to see a lot more clouds moving in, and we can use that sky cover as help predict fire behavior with that as well. And then your precip potential. So they're basically showing no chance of any precipitation tomorrow, and then like a 9% in the afternoon, evening, heading into Saturday, which is very low chances. And then of course, mixing height here, you can see that this is times 100 feet. So tomorrow 1 p.m. you're gonna have a mixing height of like about 2,500 feet. And so you can look at this. This would be pretty important if you're burning a lot of brush piles. Having decent mixing height. And then your 20-foot winds, you can see that the 20-foot winds are fairly close to your surface winds. And then your grassland fire index. So basically all of this is showing. And then also at the bottom here, you can see that, like, if you drag your mouse across, you can see that it puts the data across so you can kind of see where things are going. So like I said, when you're forecasting or you're looking at weather, the big thing is making sure that you're checking in often. Up at the top right hand corner on this deal, you can see when it was last updated. So this was last updated at 1:36 p.m., just roughly an hour ago. They tend to update on a fairly regular basis, and if it's active weather, they tend to update it more often. But I don't think there's necessarily a set schedule that I've seen. One of the things that I've noticed is that, if you go to bed at 10 p.m. at night, looking at the forecast, and you wake up in the morning and maybe that forecast still hasn't been updated for the morning. You wake up at 5 a.m., that forecast could still be at, midnight or something like that. And so make sure you wait for that updated forecast in the morning to make sure everything's still good to go. The other thing that I highly recommend is making sure you're reading your forecast discussions. Again, I'll hit on this several times, but I believe it was last Friday. So like Monday was potentially a good burn day or something like that. And the previous Friday, basically in the forecast discussion, they basically said that we're fairly confident that we're underestimating how warm it's going to be for the upcoming Monday. And so there was a lot of prescribed burns that were being planned for that Monday because things were looking pretty decent. But if in the forecast discussion, they're like, we're way under forecasting this thing, and by this weekend, it's going to change. And sure enough, things changed, and record high temperatures, way out of prescription. And I think they issued, several red flag warnings as well. And so, you could spend all that time potentially planning to burn and then just having to call it off, and if you read that forecast discussion, you probably would have been in a better spot to say, I don't think it's going to happen just based off of what they were saying. Another good thing to look at is every one of these offices has a fire weather page, and these all completely look different. And so, really good to visit your local one and get familiar with it. They got kind of individual information for different regions. But to find those, you're going to go to your forecast page again. You're going to see forecasts here. You're going to be under fire weather. And it'll basically take you to their landing page. So this is Omaha's page. Has a lot of different information in there. You see they got the fuels in there. This is kind of what Hastings looks like. Fairly similar. It's got links to some of the different things. And let's see. And of course, North Platts. So one thing you can see that is fairly consistent across the board on these is that they have these kind of fire zone forecast. And so you can click on these individually forecasts, and it kind of gives you these fire weather discussions, and then kind of gives you your like daily briefing of like, okay, what's the minimum temperature, what's the maximum temperature, max humidity, smoke dispersal, mixing heights, things of that nature. So basically, gives you kind of a good idea of what's happening more locally. You can see that they're both, all of them are kind of a little bit just structured differently. But again, in the discussion, they typically talk about different things relating to fire weather. Obviously, fire concerns should stay low, like this, except for the southeastern counties of Richardson, which may be drier. So just good overall. The more information you have, the better. I'm gonna come back to this, but what I use now, what I think is a little bit better. So there's two different ones that I like using. I like using the fire weather dashboard, probably the most. It's my kind of go-to first initial look. And so this is basically, you click on where you're located, you can zoom in, same deal with it as the other, like the weather service page. This is a National Weather Service product. The one thing is if you want to like save a location, just go here to change domain, and then you can save. Then you can bookmark it. I think probably best if you just go up and copy this or share it to your phone, but then that changes the domain to that specific location. And what I really like about this page is if you scroll down here, wherever you click on, it has the fire forecast and the forecast discussion already on this page, so you don't really have to go looking for it. So here you can just click on forecast, fire weather forecast, and it's going to show you that kind of same information in there. And then also just the regular forecast discussion, which is really helpful to get some of that background information on what they're doing. The other cool thing is that, so all these categories, so they have basically two different, they've got the data tab up top here, and then the hourly here, but they also have the hourly weather graphs in here as well. And so you can kind of see anything that's in red on this is typically kind of when you're starting to get into kind of the more of a danger zone when it comes to fire. So let's say like the maximum temperature was going to be 90 degrees, that would probably be shaded red. Or if the minimum RH is going to be 15, that would probably be shaded red. And so, and then the greens, typically, like if you have a max RH of 100, your fire concerns are a lot less, obviously. So that's going to be more shaded green. And so this gives you kind of your daily, weekly view of, you can kind of see what things are trending as. And then you scroll down, you got a little bit of an hourly weather table, very similar to the hourly weather graph. And you can see the wind direction here. They have both listed as degrees, and also, so this would be northwest winds going through there. And you can scroll further as well. And then these hourly weather graphs, you can configure these looks a little bit. I don't really mess with it all much. One thing I don't like about this is it does that this weather wind graph gets a little messy and cluttery at times. So that's a really good website to use. I believe that the Duluth National Weather Service office, I put that together, but it's been really helpful. Let's see, question I've seen on the chat. A couple National Weather Service pages have started showing the Grassland Fire Danger Index, but haven't been able to find it on any Nebraska websites. Believe that Omaha, they do the fire danger maps. Same thing with the Nebraska Forest Service. Yeah, I don't know. I don't use the Grassland Fire Danger Index that much. So I have to look into that. Let's see. Too many tabs open here. So the other thing, Weather Service and Forest Service, the rest of Forest Service puts out these two fire danger forecasts in these maps. So here's your fire danger forecasts. So today, tomorrow, day 3. And to me, that doesn't, it kind of just, I think it gives a little bit of a false sense for some people of like, oh, it's a 4, it shouldn't burn that day, but that's not necessarily true when it, prescribed fire. But um, I do like the kind of maximum wind gust forecasts. Um, it'll show you kind of like where the winds are going to be gusting the highest. Kind of gives you that category there. And then also the humidity. And the Weather Service really puts, I think they're on that Omaha site. It shows it a little bit better from that forecast standpoint. Just puts it in a little bit of a better format, easier format to. So like minimum relative humidity, max wind gusts, you can see here. But I'm going to show you as you get closer to your burn, typically like the day before a burn, I'm going to show you a couple different tools to look at. So the one that I really, really like and is really kind of my go-to these days is these graphical forecasts. And what I really like about this is it kind of gives you a little better picture of what things are or what's happening on the landscape outside of just your local area. So I think one of the biggest problem we have is people will go onto their, to their little farm or their ranch and look at the forecast and things look really good. But it doesn't really give you kind of the fuller picture of kind of what's happening regionally. Maybe 10 miles west or 20 miles north or what have you. So this gives you the graphical forecast gives you a little bit better picture on what is happening. And so you can see here, so this basically gives, you can zoom in and out of here. And up here at the top corner is you can change what you want to look at, right? So if you want to look at maximum temperature, or you want to look at just temperature, you can look at humidity, you can look at wind gusts. Let's go look at, let's just do wind direction real quick. So you can see this gives you kind of a better picture of what winds are doing in the state. Obviously, very heavy northwest wind day. But the why I really like this is, let's see if I can find some place that, like, here's a really good example. So let's say you want to do a prescribed burn, you're right here. Your hourly weather forecast is going to be telling you that it's going to be a southeast wind, all day. But just north of you, there's a northeast wind. And so by looking at this map, you can kind of see that there's a potential that depending on how the system is moving, right? Systems move from west to east, typically southwest to northeast or northwest to southeast. You could see that there's a potential that the winds that are forecasted could change, right? Because these are all basically models that are inputted into a system. And so they're just guessing. just like any other meteorologist, or person trying to predict the future is. They're just guessing. And so there could be instances where things are speeding up or the system is slowing down. So it could potentially change, very minutely, depending on if you're close to a boundary like this, things could very much change in terms of what is happening. And so I like to use this like, let's say you're right on the edge of your prescription and it's supposed to be, they're calling for 25% humidity. If you clicked on this humidity, um, and it's basically showing this big blob of drier air coming in from the west, and you're right on the line. So let's say if you're right on this 100 degree or 100% humidity, and you can see this lighter shade here where it's in the 70s or something like that, and the system is going to be moving further, so you can use this time step here. So this is Friday, you can time step it, and this is going to be 3 a.m. This is going to be 4 a.m. You can basically see the progression of where like wind gusts are or humidity, like which way it's moving. So if you're kind of right on the edge of a bubble, you can either plan for or potentially shut down or go with your prescribed burn, looking at kind of this graphical model. I think it gives just kind of a better picture of surrounding of what potentially could be happening. You know, is it going to potentially be drier if the system speeds up, or is it, moving in a direction where, we have more buffer room, versus like this 96% humidity versus 66. Like you're gonna have a lot more buffer before that lower humidity or higher humidity reaches you. And the same thing just goes with that wind. I've seen multiple times where a prescribed burn is happening and it's in an area where these winds are just kind of all over the place. And if you don't click on, 30 miles west or north or something like that, it potentially could switch on you. And so this is a really good way to analyze that. Again, showing this time slider, you can go all the way out to next Wednesday. Again, that far out, it's not going to be reliable. Let's see if I can find actual. So that's pretty standard. You can see that this big blob of drier air coming in from the southwest, kind of creeping into Nebraska. If you time step it forward, that went way too far. You can kind of see as those progress. Now this does not work very well on a mobile device. And so what does work good on a mobile device is this low bandwidth graphical forecasts. And so it basically opens it up to this, and you can click on your region. So here's Nebraska, and you can even click on even further. So if you wanted to go just on a smaller regional scale, it'll pull up just the forecast area. And then on here, there's a couple different things to look at. So here's top left here is there's a daily view, and this basically shows you 6 a.m., 9 a.m., 12 p.m., 3 p.m. And then to advance it 12 hours, click up top here, and that'll give you 6 p.m., 9 p.m., and then to overnight. They also have a weekly view. So this would basically be for today, tonight, Friday night, Saturday view as well. And this basically gives you just kind of a brief overview. You can look at all the different ones. So see if I can find. Yeah, so here's wind speed. So you can check wind speeds or winds on Friday, 12 p.m. and noon, 3 p.m. there. Here you can kind of see a little bit of that, those weird weather patterns. Um, that if you're kind of stuck right on the edge. And then they also have hourly views. So if you want to look at hourly, you can scroll down here. It doesn't really work well on my computer screen here, but they have all the wind speed, wind gusts, humidity, temperature, um, basically all the parameters, and all you gotta do is just hover over it. So again, if you want to look at 2 p.m. today, humidity, it's gonna give you kind of that as well. And then it's 3 p.m., 4 p.m., 5 p.m. And you can tell what you're on because if you look at the bottom down here, it'll tell you that the forecast, this is Thursday, February 19th at 5 p.m. And then you could also create loops for it as well. So maximum temperature, you put it on a loop, and it'll basically loop it through. So that's 3 p.m. There's noon, 3 p.m. And then you can also I typically go to this fire weather one. So that's just like the general public, but they also have a fire weather one that's really good to utilize, especially in the hourly view. So fire weather here at the top right hand corner next to that. Um, you'll see that has a couple different. I'm gonna have to use a different view. I'm gonna use the daily view because it's a little bit easier to see on the screen. But um, here you can kind of see has all kind of the fire weather stuff that we typically look at. So here's wind speed down here. Shows you that wind gusts, wind direction. You can kind of see that there's this little something coming through here where there's going to be pretty high winds right in the center, but on the outskirts of it, it's not necessarily going to be as windy. Um, Another thing to really look at too that I like on here is that they have a 24-hour probability of critical weather. I'm going to zoom out to actually show that a little better. So here you can see this is a 24-hour probability of critical fire weather. So you can see that, like the red flag that we had the other day, they had that PDS red flag that actually showed up on there. And so this is kind of their, elevated, critical versus extreme. So you can kind of see where those edges align. And so, this whole area is probably in a red flag warning, but you can see that the most critical areas are highlighted in red, and then if it was extreme like the PDS one we had the other day, you would see the bright pink in there. The other great thing about is this also shows dry thunderstorm potential, um, showing that if there's any potential for dry thunderstorms to pop up, then they would list those areas in there as well. Doesn't look like we have any probability of any dry thunderstorms across the country currently, which is good. So it's a really good resource to kind of narrow down, the night before, whether, how things are looking, just to give you more and better access or more information to plan your burn. And let's see. And if you're planning to burn and you don't have time to necessarily, or you want to spend a lot of time looking at the map, they do have a couple tools that I've seen people use, or at least one tool. It's like basically you plug in your information and it will basically try to find a time frame that fits your parameters, which I don't find very useful just because, like, if you plug in pretty tight parameters, it's going to be like, yes, you can burn between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., like, well, that's not really helpful. We're not necessarily want to be burning at night or can. Um, God, I'm trying to find that link now. It's like the activity planner. Oh, there it is. So here you can go in and plug in your temperature parameters. Say you want to be, let's just see if something will pull up here with wind speeds. We're going to do 20 to 30. I imagine we could probably plug in our longitude and latitude. Yeah. Again, I don't use it very often, but if you want to go in and play with it, I look at the weather probably too often to know what's going on anyway, but all right. So that basically is kind of getting us to, right before your burn that you're going out. So I'm just going to talk about a couple different things here. One, while you're planning in the planning process, this is also a really good tool to use. You basically plug in your latitude, longitude, how many acres, what kind of fuels, what ignition, and kind of what wind direction. And this will actually pop up kind of your smoke forecast of where your smoke's going to go. Probably utilize that more during your kind of burn planning process. It just kind of gives you a good idea of how far your smoke's going to go. The good thing about the Great Plains is that, if you wait 6 hours, smoke's probably going to clear out. So, um, but down in the southeast, where they're very fortunate to have like 4 or 5 days of like burn weather, but they don't get much wind, some of that smoke planning kind of goes a long way for them as well. The other thing you want to take a look at is your kind of the smoke forecast. Obviously, if there's a lot of smoke in the air from wildfires or other prescribed fires in the region, or could be from dust or whatever, just make sure you're considerate. I know folks like in Omaha and Lincoln area, they got to really look at this quite a bit because they got to get permits for air quality. But, if you got a big blob of wildfire smoke moving in and you do a prescribed burn, it potentially, depending on the culture of your area, very well could you be like, why are you adding more smoke when it's already really bad out? So it's a good tool to utilize. These monitors, you can click on them. If it's really bad air quality, they'll turn red. Medium air quality, I believe, is the yellow, and green's fairly good air quality. And a lot of times, what you'll see on these maps as well during high fire seasons, is you'll actually see it'll actually show kind of like these plume forecasts. So like when Kansas rips off 1 million acres of fire in the springtime, a lot of times you'll see these kind of like gray or dark gray blobs on here that will actually show kind of where that smoke is drifting to, and kind of and you click on them and it'll kind of tell you where that smoke is kind of tending to go toward, whether it's coming to Lincoln, Nebraska, or it's heading down to Oklahoma. I think last year we got pretty lucky. Most of the burn days that they burned on, I think all went kind of back down in Oklahoma and down south. So didn't have too many bad air quality days that we normally do. The other thing I highly recommend, getting a spot weather forecast if you can. So typically spot weather forecast requests can only come from, government officials, volunteer fire department chiefs, things of that nature. If you have a really good relationship with your, local National Weather Service office, they may do one for you, especially if they're not busy. So be sure giving them a call for that. But if you've got a really big burn or a complex burn, I would just recommend asking your fire chief to submit one for you. And just, once they get the spot forecast back, they can send it to you. I think that's good all the way around. The other thing is if there's, if you're in the fire season, a lot of times you'll see these spot forecasts come in from agencies that can request them officially, and you can click on them. So if you're doing a prescribed fire and somebody nearby you is also doing a prescribed fire, you can click on these and actually see what their spot forecast is looking like. Um, it's not going to give you a full picture necessarily, but in the discussion, you can read basically the discussion. Um, it'll show information in there that typically is fairly close to what's in the hourly weather graph or the fire weather forecasting page. But it will be um, in the forecast discussion. Sometimes they'll add more information in that discussion based off of their personal belief in their forecasting abilities and stuff like that. So kind of interesting to look at when you do that. Let's see if I can find here's that one from Ranger Road. Curious to what they looking like the RH is going to recover to 40-50, which is good. But yeah, minimum Wednesday, they had minimum humidity at 12%. That's spicy. 36-mile-an-hour gusts in the afternoon. But basically, if you want to submit a forecast, again, if you want to have fire chief do it, or if you're part of a government agency, you can do it. But pretty easy to do. Just go into the request, put in your location, and then or select it on a map. You got basically all these different ways of getting that in there. Put in with their prescribed fire, and then generate spot, and they'll email you um, the information. So basically show up and be like, okay, here it is on that map. So that's kind of a really nice thing to have if you can get access to it. So I know there's other areas of the country where I think down in Texas, I think landowners submit their own requests. So my advice would be to reach out to your local National Weather Service office to ask them about submitting spot requests. And then kind of the last thing, while you're actively on the fire line, obviously if you've got cell phone, internet service, this is also a good way to kind of keep track of kind of what's happening out there. So let's say you're potentially, feeling a wind shift, or get a call maybe that there's supposed to be a wind shift coming up. This is kind of a good way in which you can kind of go and look at and see, what is actually what's happening out on the landscape. Let's see. This is a new. Rob, you had to help me figure this out last time. How do I get to change the air temperature? Oh, there it is. Okay. So we'll go to the weather here. You can see, you can change it to your relative humidity. So you can see that you can see some dry air working in there. Wind speed and direction again on the day. So I remember one burn we were on several years ago. Um, the wind was acting really strange. So we actually pulled this up, and you could see that there was some kind of like disturbance or something coming across the landscape, and you could see it on this map based off of the wind directions from these mesonet sites, which is really cool, right? So be able to kind of see real-time information, not only, you know, near your fire, but across the state as well. So kind of really cool information to be able to have. And then basically the final thing is, making sure you're recording weather on site. And so, one of the things that we started doing a couple of years ago is if you have, obviously, if you have, you got a Kestrel, well, I guess one, make sure that, you keep that thing calibrated. I believe the kind of the recommendation is, calibrating at least like every year or two on some of the older models. And then some of the fire weather models, they say to get them recalibrated at least every 3 years. So, having outdated Kestrel is not going to help you out all that much. So make sure you get those things calibrated. But if you have one of the newer models of the Kestrels, it actually stores the data, and then you can also plot the data. And so you can basically set this thing up, turn on your Bluetooth on your phone, and every time you pass by, it basically updates it. So you can kind of see how things are progressing on your burn, which is really, really cool to see. And then after the fire, you can download that information and kind of see, how things progress throughout the day. And one of the things I think that I would think we need to do more often is, checking that against um, our forecast that we got, earlier in the day, and kind of comparing the two and seeing where, how well it lined up, and utilizing that information to just kind of like, look at trends potentially across the forecasting. Like, are we getting, more winds than are forecasted throughout the season, or are we getting less, or is the humidity higher or lower? And so, if you do that with a Kestrel, I recommend, reaching out to the Weather Service office as well, and letting them know, especially if there's a really large gap of information or of data, saying like if they were saying winds are going to gust to 20, but they gust to 30, or reach out to that National Weather Service office and ask them like, here's what we saw, and then they potentially will likely be able to give you an explanation, and then giving that explanation to you is also going to help you become a better planner for these fires as well, because you can maybe look out for that information um, in the future. And so I think that The other thing I recommend is also before you go out and burn, I highly recommend taking a screenshot or print out a page, or do both. I think both is probably best because you could lose your paper copy. So screenshot your hourly weather graph just so you have reference for that in the future is really good practice as well. And then also utilizing that information throughout the burn. I know some folks take weather measurements every, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, every hour. It just kind of depends on, how many people you have or whether you have the time to do it. But it's a really good practice to do that. Let's see. So just kind of ending here, share this. Couple things that we've seen and just some stuff. Avoid burning in light and variable winds. We continue to see this every year, where people think that burning in light and variable winds is good. It is not. If you've ever burned in light and variable winds, you know that the fuel overtakes the weather conditions, right? So if you have a 15-mile-an-hour wind, the wind's going to overcome the fuels. But if you're burning with a 4-mile-an-hour wind or 5-mile-an-hour wind, the fuels overtake the weather conditions. And so what we see when that happens is that, you'll feel wind against your face and you're thinking that you're burning, downwind, starting your backing fire. And what happens is that fire, once you light it, will gather up kind of momentum and it'll make a run on you. So it'll run in the opposite direction on you because that fuel is pulling it in, right? Taking that heat, and then it's going to run on you. And then you're like, oh man, this thing's going to be out of control. And then all of a sudden it'll stop, right? Maybe a little bit of wind picks up, a little small gust or something. And then the fire can pick up and it'll go in a different direction. So you really have no idea where the fire is going to be. So avoid burning in light and variable winds. Some exceptions to that could be is if you're burning a smaller site and you have higher humidities, right? So that's when the higher fuel moisture, higher humidity can help with that. Avoid burning with a predicted wind shift. I've seen this a couple times where somebody thinks that they can be done with their site before that predicted wind shift. Let's say it's predicted at 4 p.m. They're like, oh, we're going to be done by noon. Well, things always happen in prescribed burns that you can't predict, can't always plan for, right? So, theoretically something could, you could have a delayed start or, some incident or something happened or whatever, and you're not done by 4 o'clock. And if you're not done by 4 o'clock and that wind shift comes, you're going to be in trouble. And so, avoid burning with that predicted wind shift. I would say, from my perspective, avoid burning before it is most critical. But I also don't like burning on either side of a wind shift because, they're not always sudden or succinct, right? So typically before a wind shift, a lot of times you'll like, my experience is when a wind shift happens, it typically goes from, the winds are fairly steady and then all of a sudden the wind just stops. And then it slowly kind of starts to change directions. And so that shift can happen over a period of time. And it can also happen way before it was predicted or way after. So just because the forecast is saying that wind shift's going to happen at 4 p.m., it doesn't mean that it's just all of a sudden going to flip at 4 p.m. and be from the other direction. That sudden shift or the stoppage of that winds could start happening at 2, or the sudden wind shift could happen at 2 p.m. instead of 4 p.m., or it could happen at 6. You just never know. So it's always to err on the side of caution and try to avoid those wind shift days. But I obviously, realize that, people do it and have done it successfully. But typically, and also, we run out of days. And so that's also a problem. The other thing I've noticed is if the hourly weather is changing a lot by like large swings, like, let's say 2 days before you're looking at weather up to your burn day, and it's changing. Like one day it's a southwest wind and a northeast wind or whatever. To me, that basically is saying that the models are not confident in the forecast. And so basically to that means that there's a lot of variables happening, and it potentially could even change, an hour before, the actual forecast or actual burn day. So if the models aren't in agreement with what the forecast is showing, that should be kind of one of those red flags to you, saying, "Wow, man, if the models aren't picking up what's happening. I may need to look into this further and investigate, to see what's happening." And again, like they say, the trend is your friend. If things are trending warmer, you can bet that it could potentially be even warmer. Or if the trends back down the other way, or if the winds keep increasing every time you look at it, like that could be kind of that sign of like, well, this potentially could have more winds that day or lower humidity. And so one thing that we always see, like talk about in our basic or introduction workshops is, like for every degree you open temperature, your humidity is going to be dropping as well. So just that slight change in air temperature out there could drop your relative humidity. And again, I've reiterated this several times, but make sure you're reading your forecast and your fire weather discussions. There's a lot of really good information in there that those trained meteorologists and experts in weather have insight into, and can save you some time and headache. Again, have a local fire chief or somebody submit a spot weather forecast for you, especially if you're doing, large complex stuff, or you're doing stuff near cities and towns, stuff like that as well. I think it's just kind of a good safety net for everybody to utilize. Not sure. I'd like to ask how many spot weather forecasts they get every year. It'd be interesting to see. But the other thing is call your National Weather Service office. You know, call them up. For your burn and ask them, how things are looking. If there's still, if there's anything that you need to be on the lookout for. And a lot of times they could share that insight. Sometimes, I've called them a couple times, where they basically say, yeah, things are looking pretty good, or, we have lower confidence in the forecast today, things like that. Prepare like you're going to be burning at the limits of your prescription. And so, a lot of times in our burn plans that we write, we put in this really wide range of prescriptions in order to find a day. And so, always prepare your unit like you're going to be burning with the maximum possible um, parameters that you'd be utilizing. So you're at your lowest humidity, at your highest wind. Make sure you're preparing for burning at those limits. And then when you're burning, let's say you're planning on burning on a day where you're going to be close to your limits. Make sure you factor in um, make sure you factor in that it's going to, your relative humidity could drop to 20, or your wind gusts go higher. So try to factor in a little breathing room for that as well. And then, of course, make sure to record weather on site. This is kind of standard practice, but it's just good practice to remind people of, to make sure to record that weather, because I think it's not only beneficial for us, but it's also beneficial for the National Weather Service um, in the long run. If especially if you call them up and say, "Hey, here's what was forecasted. Here's what we got," and a lot of times, they'll very easily be able to explain why it happened. There's a lot of factors that go into, especially on the ground weather, right? There's weather on the surface and there's weather in the atmosphere, and all those variables that kind of go into it, um, figured in. Kind of like drought, drought can exacerbate, relative humidity, make relative humidity a lot less um, than forecasted, right? So maybe some of the models don't pick up on that, but if you're in an exceptional drought and there's no soil moisture in the, first 20 inches of soil or whatever, like there's probably gonna be less humidity out there. Um, but yeah, with that, that's all I kind of had. Are there any questions or anybody have anything to add? Like I said, we do have a link on our, Ashley, help me out. What's that site called? Linktree.
Yeah, I put that in the chat too.
Did you? Okay. So I checked it earlier and there's a couple links that are kind of out of date, that we probably need to kind of take a look at, but oh yeah, perfect. There it is. So we can get that updated as well, and have you check it out. But um, big thing too is don't overthink weather forecasting either. You can definitely overanalyze a forecast and prevent yourself or convincing yourself that it's not a good burn day. So um, one of the things we talked about in the refresher this year, if anybody was on that, is like in drought years, we're recommending just adding, 10% additional personnel, water, equipment, things of that nature, just to add kind of a safety aspect to some of the drier weather conditions. And I would imagine that after, this snowstorm, I know a lot of fire districts across the state have kind of shut down burn permits for now. I think if you think about, so for every 10 inches of snow, it's about 1 inch of moisture or a precipitation liquid equivalent. So, if you get 5 inches of snow, it's about a half inch of rain, theoretically, if it soaks into the ground, which I think the ground should probably be warm enough that it would soak in fairly easily. Um, if there's any weather nerds that want to also take a look at, we'll show you a couple other things that I just look at as kind of a weather nerd. This is actually satellite imagery. So you can actually, this is Nebraska right now. It's basically real-time satellite imagery that you can kind of look at. See the sun come up here, maybe. There we go. So you can kind of see the storm kind of moving throughout the state. You can see those heavier bands of snow. There's that dry air line coming, moving in. But there is a product on here. That you can actually see hot spots of fire on it, which is kind of cool. So on like super on red flag days and stuff like that, I typically will go on here and you can kind of see um, where fires are kind of happening. Wildfires in particular. I'll I'll zoom out here and see if I can go down to Oklahoma, see if those fires are going still. Well, they got a little one. See this little black spot right here. So right there. So you can see that's a fire. That could be that Ranger Road fire, maybe flaring back up a little bit. But it kind of shows you some burns on, and you'd be surprised on how small of burns these things pick up. These will pick up, little 20, 30 acre prescribed fires. And then, of course, on days like yesterday when that big fire happened, those shows, yeah, see, here's yesterday's progression of that fire. You can see right as that sun peaked out, got more sun, that thing just took off. across the landscape. All the other little fires that kind of popped up. And then like from Nebraska, you can see they shows, is it popped up the other day or not? There they are. So there's the ones by Cozad. Stop. One by Smithfield there in Gosper. There's one by Cozad. And there's another one up north later in the evening too. Kind of popped up. It's kind of interesting to just see those if you're a fire nerd or weather nerd. That kind of cool to be able to see that. And then this site is also, if you never utilize this site, this also can show all sorts of stuff. Like I don't recommend looking at it because you could easily get really wrong information in terms of like there's like weather models and stuff like that on here that you can look at that show like snowfall forecast. And I look at it because I'm just curious, but there's a lot of wrong information if you don't know what you're actually looking at. So but that's kind of a cool site to use. I think, Ashley, can we paste that into the chat? Yeah, I'll do that. And you can change, just show you here on there. You can actually do these product overlays. So here's mapping. You could turn county layers on, state routes, US highways, different things on there. You can also turn on the radar. Bunch of different things on there. And vectors. You kind of see that real-time satellite information, part of that kind of real-time stuff. So, all right, is any other questions or perfect?